This is Ring of Fire. I'm Alex Barr.
And I'm Emmy, the Birth Wizard.
Hey, do you want to do a little theme music?
Yeah, let's do with a Ring of Fire.
Loved it.
Yeah. So, true apologies to everyone. We're like starting a little bit later, but like I'm super stoked about this episode, and like we have been talking about doing this particular episode since we met, and we keep holding back because we're like, oh, that's gonna be a big episode, so like let's make sure we don't go out there with like a huge episode and like us being fired up.
And everybody who knows me knows I get very fired up about this topic and about fat activism in general, so I'm ready.
I'm super stoked to be talking to you in particular about it because of your knowledge and because of how like on fire you are about it.
On fire.
But because you really are, and I feel that just in my friendship in the time with you, I've already learned so much. So I'm excited to hear tonight because I know I'll learn more just by like being able to see you in your element talking about it.
I love hearing that. And you know, I consider myself like a fat activist, and I feel like I've been kind of doing that work for a long time, you know, since my Tumblr era where I found fat bloggers sharing their lives like, oh, you can be fat and happy kind of thing. And I feel like just in living my life the way I do and being unapologetically fat and saying no to diet culture and all the bullshit alone makes me an activist in that way.
Yeah.
You know, because it is so hard to exist in a fat body when you're not trying to actively shrink it.
And I think that's it should be noted that anytime you're willing to go against the grain and give people language, that's an activist move, right? And because you've been doing that, I would definitely call you an activist. Yeah. I think anytime someone's willing to be like, that's bullshit, right? Here's new words that we use now, friend. Like, you're doing the work. So I think it's really cool. And it's something that I'm coming into in probably the past like 2 to 3 years. Fat has always been used as a derogatory thing towards me. I had a mom who had a lot of like body image issues, and so I look back on photos where I thought I was fat. It turns out I was just thin.
Same.
And then
I was just chunky.
Right. Same. Yeah, I was thin with a Latin ass, and so thus I was fat. Yeah. And I can tell you the first time I remember that word being used towards me was when I was 11. And it's incredible, like, how impactful that word can be. So I'm really excited to learn about this and, like, to help kind of tear away it from a derogatory thing instead of it being just a word, right? So, but I want to start out with the very first question because it's something that I'm still learning. Who is fat? Who is not fat, and why is it just a word and no longer a derogatory thing?
Okay, love it. So we can start with the derogatory. First of all, before I answer that question, the preface that I say when I talk about any of this stuff is that nobody owes you health, right? First of all, you cannot tell if someone is healthy by looking at them.
Correct.
Second of all, it's none of your business whether someone's healthy or not. And I feel like we get into this thing where like, oh, but as long as you're healthy. No. You can do whatever you want. And if we want to talk about it from a disability justice like type of lens, some people will never be healthy, right? Yeah. Some people will never be what we believe is the version of healthy people should be aspiring to be, right? So that's my little caveat.
I think that's a good caveat to have. Because
we will talk about like healthy things what is considered to be healthy in this conversation. But again, nobody owes you that.
Yeah, for sure.
So the first thing is fat is a descriptor, right? It's literally like it's such a neutral word.
Yeah.
Right? And you hear a lot like people's misunderstanding of like who is fat and who is not is like so large, right? because I have been considerably plus size most of my life, but I heard, oh, you're not fat. Oh, you're not fat. Oh, you're not fat my whole life, right? If I would say it. Of course, people were saying that shit to me behind my back, and like, right. I heard that stuff, right? It was implied that I was fat and I was too big, right? But I had, everybody would say, oh, you're not fat. The people in my life and that cared about me would say that. Because in their mind, they have this idea of who is fat, right? And that idea is different for everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
So the fat community considers that anybody at a pant size of 18 or higher is fat.
How about because you and I have had this discussion briefly, it was a term I came across about 2 years ago, which was mid-size.
Yes.
And it's the person who's small fat is another word I'll see thrown out there.
Yes. I think mid-size is bullshit.
Okay.
Just gonna say.
Yeah.
I know that became such a thing on TikTok, and people were like, well, we're misrepresented. But ultimately, the argument is that if you are, it seemed to me that people wanted to be called mid-size because they were uncomfortable with coming to the terms that they were fat. Right?
Yeah.
And uncomfortable being called plus size. We're not plus size, we're mid-size, right?
Right.
But in reality, if you're asking brands to expand their sizing, right, to 5 and 6X, your size would be included as a mid-size person, right?
Yes, it would be.
So a small fat is like 18 to like 16 to 18. A mid-fat is 20 to 24 in pant sizes. A super fat is 26 to 32. And an infinity fat is 34 and above.
Infinity fat. That's a cute word.
Yeah.
And
cute. I would encourage people who are listening to look out. There's a couple really great content creators that are infinity fats, and they talk about that stuff and what it's like to live in like a 6X body, and how that means that you're not going to find clothes, and if you do find them, you're going to find them online exclusively and things like that, right?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Even all of these inclusive brands, right, are not always being inclusive, and even those pant size numbers come with a caveat, because a size 18 for a plus size store like a Torrid or a Lane Bryant is different than like a size 18 for a straight size store, right? So there's even more of a gap. Because sometimes you're seeing even now inclusive brands go up to a 5X, but their 5X equals like a size 20.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of miscommunication in that, and it's hard.
I think it is.
And I did a fun little experiment, and I looked up how much I would have to weigh at my height to be considered at a healthy weight on the BMI scale.
Oh.
Do you want to guess?
I know your height is about 5'10", so I'm going to guess it's like 130 pounds. Yeah.
It was 150 pounds.
Yeah.
Very close, right? It's honestly insane to me to even think about being that size, right? But it's just a very interesting thing. So a lot more people are fat than they think.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And that's where even when we go into a medical stance, because a BMI of, let me see, I wrote it down. Overweight at a BMI starts at 25. And I would encourage people to go and look into that and see that, right? So what they consider overweight starts at a BMI of 25.
Okay.
The average BMI in America is 26.5.
Yeah.
So the average person is overweight.
Right.
Wouldn't that just be average?
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So my experience is I was fairly thin and athletic most of my life. And then about 22, I started to get very ill. And we couldn't figure out why. And that's when things started noticing of like Ehlers-Danlos and all of this started to like come in fruition, and I kept piling on weight after my kids were born, and recently I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, which also makes you gain weight drastically. And on and off I would try different like extreme diets and all of this, and I just have finally gotten to a point with all of this where I'm like, fuck it. Like, I would just much rather enjoy my body and get to know her here. Yeah. And if she changes again, great. And if she doesn't, that's okay. Yeah. But I should be able to love it right here, right now. And like, fuck, dude, this body in like 4 years had 4 pregnancies. Like, Jesus, like, like it should gain a little bit of weight and keep it on. And
well, and that's what the interesting thing is like the perspective that like you should never gain weight, or you should weigh as much as you did when you were a teenager. Yeah. Even though you're a literal adult, right?
Right.
And you were experiencing pregnancies, and you were experiencing all sorts of things, lifestyle changes, moving, stressors, jobs, all of that stuff affects you and your life and the way your body moves. And it's a very, very, very capitalist idea that we should look the same always.
Yeah,
for sure. And do the same thing always. And be able to do the exact same thing every day the way we did it the day before. Right. And eat the same thing every single day. And exercise the same thing every... You know what I'm saying? Like it's very like... We're humans and we're robots, right?
Right.
And even now I see more people talking about people who do have menstrual cycles, about how that fluctuates your hormones so much. You are going to need to eat more or less or move differently in different times and things like that. And I'm sure people without menstrual cycles are still going through some hormonal cycle that they could pinpoint.
Yep.
But we're trying to force our bodies into these holes, into these little tiny boxes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. So this is the part where we get into like birth work and like how this relates across. You just said it. The majority of Americans are considered overweight. Yeah. So is everyone getting treated as if they're fat then, or are the majority still being treated as like, as you put it, like thin or straight sized, and then only the ones that are perceived as fat by that particular provider is being treated that way? I don't want to use the word risk, but who is being treated
that way?
Yeah. And
that's where it's kind of interesting, because it really depends on each person's idea of who is fat, right? So that's where you'll see more personal bias come in, right? Because I do meet people who I meet providers who are like, yeah, you're fine, whatever, you know. But then I meet providers who are like, oh my God, you're gonna die tomorrow, right? And ultimately, even if that was true, okay,
right,
mind your business, right?
Right. So I die tomorrow.
All right. So, and that's where the whole like health doesn't belong, like my health doesn't belong to other people kind of thing comes in. But it's really tough because we see some people who are really not fat or very small fats getting treated poorly, right? And so it kind of falls into like this really wide spectrum of how you're getting treated and how people are perceiving you, and this idea of like, did they treat me that way because I'm fat? Like, you have to question that, right? So, like, there's lots of stuff where, like, you're asked about your exercise routine over and over again, right? Or you're not believed what your exercise routine is. Or your diet, the same thing. Am I going to be believed when I share what I eat in a day? Yeah. How much I move in a day, right? Yeah. And were they this tough on their straight size client that they had before me? Right. Were they that concerned about their exercise and their diet, or did they ask them and they believed it? Did they ask them at all? Right? I grew up with a straight size sister who's fucking beautiful, and she never got asked about that stuff. I've been counseled on my diet at every doctor visit since I was like 8. You know? It's been a term of like conversation for my whole life, and I know
you're not
that.
Gonna say that and just be past it like that. 8. What can a child do about their diet? Like,
are you eating sweets? Are you eating enough vegetables? Are you moving enough? Or are you just sitting on the couch? Are you watching too much TV? Right? It's the same thing, right? I think like the average like person, like young girl is like. It's like so likely to start an eating disorder by like 12. Yes. I don't know the numbers, but I know that it's high. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And so that's where it's like, what are we doing? Because you're right. What can a literal child do?
Right.
My meals were planned for me. My meals were cooked for me.
Exactly.
I had very little control over it, right? And even then, as I got older, it was the same stuff, you know? But it just gets worse. And as you get older, you're more of like a lost cause.
Right.
When you're younger, they can be like, oh, you'll grow out of it. You'll get taller. Don't worry, right? That kind of stuff. But then it just slowly fades into like, oh no, like you're fat. You need to do something about that. Or my favorite thing is that for a long time, people do it less now, which is interesting. But for a long time, whenever I'd meet people, they would just like share their diets with me, or like diets that they had heard of.
So weird,
right? And I always thought that was really strange. Like,
such an
I heard about this
invasive
person who went on a diet and they like they only ate chicken breasts or whatever the stupid thing is. Like they only juiced every day, 5 times a day, or you know all the stupid things, right? And they lost so much weight. And I'm like, why are you telling me this?
Right? Yeah. So funny. It's so interesting because my exposure to like being fat is as an adult. So that's that reason that I'm like surprised that a child would be spoken to in that way. Yeah. And even then, the commentary I got as a teen was this like, oh, you've put on a couple pounds, Em, like, and it was because I would like fall off of a sport, like it was the pause between seasons, because there was essentially 2 rules in my house. You will participate in a sport and you will be home by midnight. Right? So I participated in a sport and I was home by midnight. Yeah. But anytime we fell off of off season, oh man, you're putting on the pounds, right? Like, and it's still a commentary of like what my body looks like. It's fascinating to me that it's a discussion. Yeah.
That as an adult, that people are discussing your body.
Still discussing it, where I'm like...
And I will say, like, from a person who has been in a fat body for most of my life, will say that it is harder for people who grew up thin. Yeah. I see it. Yeah. I feel it for them, right? Yeah. Like, even, like you said, the parents commenting on it, or the friends or the family members commenting on it. Absolutely insane. Yeah. Right? My family gave up on me a long time ago. No, I'm just kidding. I told them to stop talking about it, and I disallowed, like, made that not available. That's not a conversation that I'm having with anybody, right? Because it's not their business. Yeah, for sure. So that's how it started, and now it turned into, let me tell you about all the research that I've done, and about how intuitive eating is actually better for you mentally and physically, and blah, 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 right? Yeah. So now I get to do the same thing to them that they did to me. Yeah. Let me tell you about intuitive eating. Yeah, I'll buy you that book. You want to buy me a diet book when I'm 12? I'll buy you an intuitive eating book in a heartbeat. Health at every size? Let's go. Let's talk about it.
Are you sure that you really want that? Like, have you checked in with your body yet?
Have you discussed keto with your doctor?
Oh, keto. To speak quickly on like fad diets, I was one that was on several of them. I did the B12 shots. I did something called HCG, which is an awful one. That's the one that ultimately wrecked my body and only brought up the pounds faster. Because I lost 20 pounds, and since then I've gained over 100 because I cannot get my metabolism back after wrecking it so hard. Because I was on essentially 300 calories a day. I was in true starvation mode for about 90 days. Yeah. And,
otherwise known as my high school.
Yeah, for sure. But it was...
Not discounting your experience, just saying.
No, for sure. And I am not someone who struggled with clinically diagnosable eating disorders as a teen or even as a young adult. But... now understanding intuitive eating, now understanding all of this, I'm like, oh, you were binge eating and then also like purging. Like that's what was going on.
Well, and that's what's interesting is that when you frame that in like a birth perspective, is that very often what's recommended to fat people would never be recommended to a straight size person. So explain. And would actually be a dangerous recommendation for a thin size person, right? So if you I looked it up. The actual recommendations for weight gain based on your BMI is lower than it is for a straight size person. Say someone who has like a BMI of a 20, which is about what they consider to be normal, right? It is a bit lower. But the experience that fat birthers are getting, and that I got personally, and that I've seen on every plus size pregnancy board, is a recommendation to gain 0 to 15 pounds.
That's what I was told.
Yes.
And didn't know that was a recommendation because of that. Oh.
The recommendation is higher than that.
Oh.
The actual recommendation by the College of Gynecology is higher than that. But a lot of people are given 0 to 15. But the concept of that is that you would have to lose fat.
Weight. Yeah.
On top of whatever you're gaining to house a baby, fluids, extra blood flow, right? And when I was given this recommendation, I was like, how is that fucking possible, right? A baby is at least 6 or 7 pounds by the end of your pregnancy, probably, and then all the other stuff. So why is that the recommendation, right? And so that's what's interesting, because when you're outside of the birth world, the same thing happens, right?
Yeah.
They would never tell a straight-sized person to eat 300 calories a day.
No.
Right?
No.
They wouldn't do that. That would be an eating disorder.
Yeah.
But if you're in a fat body, it's completely perceived as differently. Different, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing, a small person gaining 0 pounds in their pregnancy, a straight-sized person, would that be acceptable? That would probably have a provider looking into that, doing more tests, encouraging more calories, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
No, and it makes total sense, because I know now, because I've had enough time with like dietitians and that kind of thing, when we go into starvation mode, our bodies will actually pack on weight rather than allow you to lose it. Yes. Because it's gathering it for winter, essentially being like, yes. Oh, there's no food around, let's keep this like right here on us.
Well, and that's what's interesting about this discussion, is that even if the research says otherwise, but even if being fat and carrying excess weight was not good for you, weight alone, we're not talking about lifestyle, we're not talking about this other stuff, having extra weight was bad for you, there is absolutely no proven way to lose weight.
Right.
Right? More than 20 pounds for more than like 2 years, there's nothing out there. There's no approved diet. There's no approved method of that, because you're actively working against what your body naturally wants to do.
Right.
Right? Which is what you said. You're in starvation, your body's going to hold on to every single thing you give it.
Yes.
Right? And if you sit in this place of restrict and binge, right? Your body's going to continue to hold on to weight.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what I, even if we wanted to agree to that it wasn't healthy, right? Which the research is saying otherwise, is that there's no way.
Yeah.
Right? Even extreme measures like gastric bypass and all of those other things that are surgical weight loss methods don't have very good success rates. And they actually have very high mortality rates. Right? And some of that is because the rates of suicide is so high.
That's
because most of them gain the weight back, if not more.
That sucks.
Right? And so ultimately,
the suicide sucks, not them gaining back weight.
Yes. Yes. It sucks. It really sucks. And it's like so hard, because it's like, even if I wanted to say, okay, fine, I'm done being fat, there's literally no way for me to do that.
Right.
Right? And so the only thing that hating myself and hating my body is going to do is going to add stress. Yeah. Right? And this is what was so frustrating to me as a fat pregnant person. As a fat birther, I was like, okay, what the fuck do you want me to do about it now?
Right.
I'm literally with child, right?
Sorry. You just brought back a memory. I was in the UK during Christmas time, and we went to one of their churches there, and there was this tiny little soul. I think they were maybe 5, and they were reading out of the Bible of like, and then Mary was with child, and I couldn't like, my family and I just like all looked at, but it was a tiny British accent, so And then Mary was with child.
And so that's what started this whole thing, was an OB telling me, we don't recommend people of your size get pregnant.
So I have a couple.
Too late. It is obviously too late. I don't know why you're saying this to me right now. Want me to rewind? I don't know.
What's the suggestion then? That's and I knew this was gonna happen. When we had this episode, I knew we would have moments like this where I would have to like really combat that inner voice of like, there's no way someone said that to her, but like I know that was said to you because I've witnessed bullshit said around fat phobic providers saying bullshit. In fact, yesterday I got a message from someone that I know personally, and they're like, hey, what's your take on me doing a gestational diabetes test? I'm only 10 weeks, but they're really pushing for it. And I was like, well, I'm not your doula, so I can say whatever the fuck I want.
What did you tell them?
That there's no reason for that. That was just because she's heavy set. Like, she's... And even then, that chick is like me. She's like this... like borderline, maybe like the mean girl in high school would be like, you're fat, but like everyone else would be like, I don't know, she shops at Target, she seems fine. Like,
the interesting thing is from my research into gestational diabetes is they're actually checking for unchecked regular diabetes.
Oh,
when they're checking that early, because typically they have to wait. When do they normally do gestational diabetes tests?
Usually it's after like the 25-week mark.
Okay, like in that range.
Yeah.
It's when you're exiting second to like almost third trimester.
You can't really tell if you have gestational diabetes till that point.
Yeah.
Right? Anything prior to that, they just think you have diabetes.
Oh, cute.
Right?
Cute.
Because, and truthfully, from which I can link, there's a Midwife's Cauldron episode that goes deeper.
Oh, I love Midwife's Cauldron.
But they talked about how when people's fears around...
There it is, 28 weeks.
Yes,
28 Thank you, Lindsay.
And it says, this almost made me do mine again because it came back fine. And I was like, okay, no. It says hell to the no.
Thank you, Cass. Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is that plus-size people will be asked to do gestational diabetes tests early. They will be asked to do them over and over again. And so from my understanding that, and I'll link that episode, is they talked about how the things that we fear from gestational diabetes, like bigger babies and like things like that, most of that comes from like also untreated normal diabetes. Like that, if you have type 2 diabetes and it's not treated and you're not taking care of it while you're pregnant, that's when you'll have like a baby who's a little bit bigger, or a baby who is bigger. It causes the extra blood sugar can cause them to like grow larger in their shoulders.
Yeah.
And that's where where there's some issues. But again, that's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Gestational diabetes is not the same, right?
For sure.
But we lump it all together. Oh, you're fat, so you have a higher risk of it.
So, and this is me coming from this place of like now wondering about how to let's say I have a client, they're fat, they identify as fat, everyone sees them as fat. What can I do as a doula? What are some things that I maybe should be aware of? Like this of,
they said that they want to check my diabetes again, even though I don't have it.
10
like,
weeks, yeah.
Should I be aware of maybe some different movements to do? Like maybe not every spinning baby movement is like appropriate, right? Yeah. Or what can I do to be an even louder advocate in that room for it? Like what should be ringing words? Like as soon as I hear it, I know immediately to like jump into action.
So it's kind of hard.
Okay.
The first thing is that a lot of people who are plus size don't like being called that. Right? You will run into a lot of people who are living in bigger bodies who don't call themselves fat, right? Or who maybe don't want to talk about it at all, right? And that's why I do consider myself a fat activist, because I do loudly say, yeah, I'm fat and I'm okay with it and I'm going to wear what I want and do what I want, right? A lot of people are uncomfortable with that, right? So you'll run into that type of person. You also run into a person who is shocked that they're being considered overweight, obese, whatever category they fall into on the BMI scale, which is bullshit, by the way. Side note, BMI is bullshit and you should not follow it.
We'll have to do a whole sub episode for you just to talk about BMI.
It was literally made by a person who said, hey, this is just an observation of French men in the 17th century, or one of those old centuries. And this is just observation, and it should not be used any other place. The person who created it said that.
Cool.
But alas.
Cool. That's not problematic. That won't come back to hurt us.
Not at all. And the modern one was just taken from that and used by insurance companies. So they charge fat people more money. Which they do, by the way. So that's where even I run into it, and we talked about this forever ago when we talked about niches.
Yeah.
Should I make myself the fat doula? Should I say that? Because so many people are uncomfortable with it and so many people are being classified as plus size, right? So I would say, first of all, with everything, ask your client how they want to be addressed, right?
Yeah.
Or even let them talk about it first, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about your body? How do you want to talk about this kind of thing, right? If someone is in a bigger body, it's tough because we can just immediately go, okay, you're fat. I see you as fat. Let's do this, right? But that could also be hard for people, And I think that, I know that there's a high rate of fat people who avoid the doctor.
Yeah.
And their weight being that main reason why they avoid going to the doctor. So a pregnancy kind of forces you into this place that you're maybe once a year, maybe a little bit more, right? You're not in that environment very often. You're in it a lot when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And it's even hard to in my quest to find plus size friendly providers, right? Unless I can sit down and I can ask them questions, or midwives are great because I can email them and most of them respond. My questions about how you're going to treat fat patients, it's tough.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes people who are fat phobic will still be nice.
Yeah.
Right? Until they say that thing that you're like,
dude.
What the fuck? I thought you were a real one. I thought you were cool. I thought we were going to be friends. Right? But then they're like, it falls out of their mouth, right?
Start saying so how many Cokes did you have today? And you're like, none.
Well, I side story, saw a chiropractor for almost 2 years when I lived in Georgia. And I thought she was great. And then I was like, oh my gosh, you have been so helpful after my car accident. Now I'm getting back and PRing again on my deadlifts and blah, blah, blah. That lifting weights won't make you lose weight, right? You really should be eating less and doing cardio. What? First of all, I was complimenting you. First of all, that was a compliment. Second of all, I'm never coming back here.
Right.
I've never talked to you about weight loss. I've never talked to you about dieting because you're my chiropractor, and that's not really your job anyways.
That's not your expertise.
Just saying.
Stay within
not your
scope.
expertise, right? And that's where I will also caveat that you're OB, not a nutrition specialist.
Right.
Right? Not a nutritionist, not a dietitian. That's not their specialty.
Right, for sure.
So if they are going to talk to you about that stuff, it should be to say, hey, if you would like it, I have somebody that you can talk to, right? Not, here's my advice on how to be healthy, right? Because we know that it's not their expertise, so they're not going to be able to share that, right? So it's such a nuanced topic that it's really hard.
That's okay.
And even in my own experience, I had to be like, was that fat phobia or is that how they treat every person?
Right. Because even just during us talking just now, I did not realize that about the weight gain thing.
Yeah.
So why this is relevant and why I find that interesting that I'm now realizing this. So
how my story has always gone, the narrative, is that I received back my OR report for my cesarean, and what was written on there was reason for cesarean due to high BMI recommendation, continued cesareans. And no mention of like, you know, failed induction or like failure to progress or like the words that you would typically see on there. What's interesting about this like realization, I did not realize I was being treated fat from the very beginning of that pregnancy by that
you
office.
Wouldn't even realize that. You
Right.
went through your whole experience and did not realize till you
I
were
went
in
through
your
that whole
OR
experience, having 2 more babies,
Yeah.
then becoming a doula, then starting a podcast with a friend who made me realize it.
That's what I'm saying. It's like sneaky. It's like not a right. So what I talk about to my clients and to my other doula friends is about like you need to be prepared, right?
Yeah.
So you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know when someone's going to be like, oh yeah, high risk of stillbirth goes up 78%, right? Because you have a higher BMI.
Mm-hmm.
What is that called? Relative risk, right?
Don't
know why anybody in their life would want to use relative risk.
Right.
Does not matter to me because the absolute is 0.4 to 0.7 for people with a BMI of 20 and people over 30. BMI over 30. It's like, I was like, man, if my doctor would have told me that, I wouldn't have fucking worried about stillbirth. But I was really concerned about it because she told me the 78% number.
Right, exactly. Right? And what I'm finding interesting about us discussing this, like, I have a total passion for feedback education and making sure this gets out there. And it's so, in a weird way, it's so much simpler with my expertise in my niche because there's, you look online for like a feedback friendly provider and you'll see the checklist that ICANN has done. We have resources so you can walk into an appointment and immediately know like I'm in a safe place or not. And what's interesting talking to you right now is realizing like, again, it took
all that time
to realize I was being treated separately due to my BMI and due to what my body looked like.
Yeah. And I can give you a checklist. It's just going to be harder to check.
Yeah.
Right? And even if you check all the boxes, sometimes you will get hit with it, you know? And before I share that, because I do have like what I ask people to see if they're friendly providers.
I would love to hear that.
Concerned about it, right?
So my next providers with my other 2 pregnancies had me with the recommendation of 20 to 25 pounds. So it's like, oh my God, I can like gain weight. I can have an ice cream. I can like whatever, right? So I think it's very interesting that still there's a low-key thing there of me still being treated like I should not be gaining weight. Yeah. That's fascinating. This is like blowing my mind right now. Teresa said something.
I also found the size of the pregnant person can be assumed about the baby.
Yeah.
Yes. Comments occur early in pregnancy and continue throughout about a big baby. And that is absolutely so true. And which this is something I learned from joining plus size pregnancy, like groups and things like that. A lot of people will decline any ultrasounds after 20 weeks.
Yeah.
That's what I did because they know that even if you don't have to decline it, of course, but like if you do say yes to it, you need to be prepared for them telling you have a big baby.
Yes.
Which we're finding with straight size birthers anyways.
Yes.
So I declined it and they tried to tell me I was going to have a big baby and there was a risk of shoulder dystocia even though I'd only gained 20 pounds in the whole pregnancy and they didn't have an ultrasound. And I was like, where's your data?
Right.
Bundle height, on board. Weight gain, way below the recommended now that I know what the recommended is, right?
You're like, damn, I could have had more cheeseburgers. Like, oh.
Right? And then there's no ultrasound.
Wow.
Right? So I literally was able to say, no. Yeah. You don't have any data to tell me that my baby's going to be big, right? And then the whole other thing, I'm a big person. I got big bones, I got a big body, I got a big frame. You think I'm going to grow a baby that's too big? Probably not if there's nothing medically
going on. Yeah, exactly. You got to only check for gestational diabetes 17 times.
17 times, yes. And so that's a great point because that happens to everybody as well.
For
My
sure.
baby was 6 pounds, 10 ounces, by the way.
That's a little dude.
Little guy.
Little dude.
So
yeah,
it's just, and I got it at my 20-week ultrasound. Oh yeah, he's looking a little big, but that doesn't surprise me looking at his mom and dad. Okay, I get it. I get it, guy.
Right.
I get it, my dude.
Real subtle. Real subtle.
So it's hard. But okay, so my checklist.
Yeah.
So to see if a provider is safe, and this is what I send to like midwives and birth centers when I'm trying to add them to my resource list. Do you have BMI limits? Which doesn't really apply to OBs, but it does apply to birth centers. It does apply to some midwives if they have that, right? I don't think there's no legal limit in Arizona that I know of, right? So that's going to be a personal decision.
And that would weed it out very quickly, especially if you're going for a home birth and the home birth midwife comes out with a BMI and you're like, oh, cool. Yes. Cool.
Like, oh, I think you'd be safer in the hospital, all right? So then the second question is, do you recommend anything to plus size birthers that you don't recommend to straight size birthers? So are you recommending more exercise? Are you recommending any dietary changes? Are you recommending any lifestyle changes that you wouldn't recommend to a straight size person? Right? And that's a straightforward question, but it leads into more things. Like if I told you that I worked out for 5 hours this week, right? And a straight size person, different topic. A straight size person.
Next time.
And a straight size person told you that they worked out 5 hours this week. Would you say to both of them, that's good?
Right.
Or would you say to both of them, oh, I recommend 7 hours of exercise a week, right? Whatever their recommendation is, right? So that's something that you can really dig into. Do you make your client step on a scale? Right? I have found that with, I think with some of the midwives, they do have to take your weight.
Right.
But all the ones on my resource list say it doesn't matter to me. Like, It doesn't matter to them as a midwife. They're not going to use it against you. They're not going to say...
They have to just copy something down.
Yeah, they have to put something down. And so then I tell my birthers that you can always ask to step on the scale backwards.
That's usually what I do.
Yep, and you can ask them not to tell you how much weight you've gained. You can ask it to not be a discussion. Yeah. Right? And then my last one is, if you have an office, do you have size-inclusive seating?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a weird one, right? But do you have size-inclusive seating? Mm-hmm. Do you have seating that's one width and has arms on each side? Like, do you have somewhere where a larger person can sit comfortably? Right. The same thing with your exam tables and anything like that, right? Right. Is it comfortable for someone in a bigger body? Yeah. Right? And so for my birthers, like we talked about, asking them to step on the scale, I also tell them to kind of say no from the get-go, right? I'm meeting you for the first time. I think I want you to be my provider. Hey, I understand that I am a plus size person or a fat person or whatever descriptor you want to use. I am not comfortable talking about my diet, talking about exercise, talking about my weight. That's not what I'm here for. So I would just like it to not be a topic of discussion. Is that okay? Can we move forward with that? Right? Really easy. It's hard to do. It sounds easy, but it's hard to do, right? It's hard to do. Super hard. Because doctors are always seen as like these authoritative figures, right? But it's very simple. I understand this. I do not want to talk about it. I know everything that I want to know about it. Yeah. That's it. Right? Usually it goes over well. Right? And some people say yes, and then they end up in all of a sudden we're talking about diets, or you're telling me to exercise more or whatever, things like that, right? Sometimes it develops into more, right?
Right.
But you're allowed to do that. You're their customer. You are literally paying their bills so that you can be their patient. And it's important to have that conversation. About to use this checklist to find a regular old general practitioner. Yes, do it.
I think that's great.
Absolutely. The same things that I use when I go to the normal doctor is what I will use for my OB. And I wish that I had that checklist, because I would have ran so fast out of that OB's office.
Right.
I would not have spent that time there. But because it was presented to me the way it was, I really thought that I was at risk.
Right.
Right?
You were in danger.
Yes. I thought myself and my child were in danger.
Right.
And so I was like, oh no, right? And it took me 20 weeks to switch because I didn't know any better.
But the thing is you were able to switch.
Yes.
And this is that part where I think it's like...
And I was able to switch, but I still didn't have the right questions. I still didn't have the right language to bring to the midwives that I worked with. I still didn't have that right thing, right? I still didn't have that. And I still had an experience where I was experiencing fat phobia. Yeah. Where I was disclosing like, hey, I have a history of disordered eating and I don't want to talk about this.
Right. And
still being pressed on it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I do think it's interesting how similar. Let's go with that one, Emmy. Not two no's. Makes a yes. How similar some of these things are with VBAC versus like fat.
Yeah.
And how it really is about like cutting to the chase with the provider and being like, yo, I don't have time. Like I only got 40 weeks for this pregnancy and I found out 10 weeks in. So
you got 30 weeks left.
Right. Like let's talk about like what are your yeses, what are your nos, and if we don't fly together, cool. But I'm gonna bounce, right? Yeah. And so I think it's really neat and like so awesome that you're able to use your own story and your own like stances to help others. And like I'm sure that there's going to be people listening to this who are like, oh my god, thank you. Like literally just me sitting here finding out like all that time I was actually being treated in a certain way.
It kind of makes things click, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
It makes you say, oh.
So little thing
I didn't do anything wrong.
No,
they're just fat phobic.
A little thing that happened to me with that particular office, the one where I just figured it out. So when they gave me the gestational diabetes test, I actually passed out. I like fainted. And when I came to, they're like, oh, that's a really good sign. That must mean that you don't have it because you were able to process the sugars that quickly. And it was one of those, when I left the office to go off to lunch, I was like, did they really think I had it? Like, did I show signs of gestational diabetes? Because I had none. Also being being Mexican, you're already at a higher disposition for diabetes, and so you hear it constantly. And I'm like, I know what the signs are. I definitely was not showing a goddamn sign of gestational diabetes. Yeah, depression maybe, but not. Yeah.
All these other things that they're not concerned about, and that's where the frustration comes in. Is that you want to overstress people and make them so concerned about a 0.4 risk to a 0.7 risk of stillbirth because you're in a larger body, but I'm already pregnant, so I don't know what you want. You know what I'm saying? Like, all you're doing is adding stress. Yeah, right? For sure. And telling me that I'm at more of a risk for gestational diabetes. And then when I asked, is there anything I can do about that? She told me no. Right. She said no.
Right. Exactly.
So, again, why are you telling me this? Because it seems like to me you were trying to shame me for being larger.
Right, exactly.
Right? And that's people's go-to is like, I'm going to shame this person so that they finally get it together and get to the gym or whatever their end goal is.
Right.
Which their end goal is to feel better about themselves because they feel that they're better than you because they're not that. But but even if that stuff worked, then a lot more people would be thin, right? If you were able to shame me into that, right?
Right, yeah. It works great on everything.
Yeah.
Shame works awesome.
Shame me, right?
Well, rad. Cool. are there any big points that you feel like you need to say to like wrap this up? Because we covered a lot of material, and I know that there's going to be people who either listen to it as a fat birther themselves, or even a birth worker trying to understand like how to guide somebody through that. What's like a nice, like, we ended off the very special episode.
Be nice to fat people.
I think that's a good one.
Unlearn your own fat phobia, because you have it. You 1000% have it. The fact that you're so upset when your jeans are a little tight, or that you don't weigh the same as you did in high school, or like all of these tiny things, right? Or you think you need to go on a diet for the 100th time. Like, that's fat phobia, right? You're scared of being fat because you see how fat people are treated.
Yeah.
And you feel a certain way about fat people. And that's okay, right? It's literally drilled into our brains for forever, right? That you need to be thin and white and straight, right? It's like, that's drilled into our brain.
Shit.
And it works.
I struck out on all of those. Shit.
I got 1 out of 3. That's a joke, okay. But, you know, like, all of that is fat phobia, you know? And even if you're straight-sized, falling into the diet culture bullshit and the binging and restricting and the bad diets is so harmful to you. Right. Even if you never gain weight, right? Even if you stay thin your whole life, those habits are not healthy.
Yeah.
They're not healthy for your mind or your body or your soul. Like, hating yourself does nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Can't hate yourself thin. No. Right? No. Can't do it. It doesn't work. I've tried. So it's much better if you start that process, right? So start following fat people on the internet. Talk to your fat friends. All the good things we do to unlearn our implicit biases.
Of course. And thank you for doing the like free labor just now and teaching all of us this, because
I am so happy to actually share it.
Yeah, I know you are. And I know you've been like itching, and so have I, to like do this. But it's appreciated, this free labor that you're doing of doing this baseline education, because every time someone talks about it, we are laying down a brick towards the road of no longer oppressing individuals. Yeah. So thank you.
Yay.
Yeah. Well, this was Ring of Fire, and I'm Emmy, the birth wizard.
And I'm Alex Barr. Thank you for talking to us about fat birth.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm shimmying.
I'll shimmy too. Let's go.
Sweet.
Let's end it with a shimmy. Bye. See you next time. I'm just